Carmel, good morning.
Good morning, Neil.
I saw your Twitter thread over the weekend regarding your brother William. It was very, very open and honest of you to share the story of your mum, who was, I think, 18 when William was born. Isn't that right?
Yeah, she was 17 when she originally went into Besborough and 18 when he was born.
Was she living in Ireland, living in Cork at the time? Where was it? Because it's not clear to me.
No, she was brought up in Tipperary. She was actually born out of wedlock herself, and she was brought up by her grandmother. She left home when she was 13. She actually went to work for a convent in Tipperary, and they refused. She was to become a nun herself, but she couldn't because the father unknown was written on her birth certificate.
And they refused then because it said father unknown on her birth cert.
Yeah, well, they say it might be allowed if she went away and to be churched for a year or something to some kind of retreat, but her sister advised her just to leave.
To be churched for a year. Didn't we live in very hurtful times, like as if it was anything to do with her?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's from her own experience growing up of being so-called illegitimate in Ireland that really made her decision to flee to England when she did discover she was pregnant.
Yeah.
And then when she was in London, her fatal mistake was going to confession, and the priest then set up with the crusade of rescue to return her back to Ireland.
So that's why she went back from the UK to Besborough, right?
Yeah, which is very common, very common.
Very common. I spoke to an awful lot of women in the past, and that's exactly what happened. And William was born in Besborough, but died. Did he die soon after birth? Were there complications or what?
No, the thing was, my mum had a very hard 3-day labour, and somewhere along that labour, the nuns actually gave her an injection, and where that injection was given formed a huge abscess. But William was born absolutely healthy, a beautiful 7-pound, 11-ounce baby boy, and on the 3rd day, he became a little bit poorly, stopped feeding. My mum started to become sick. She overheard the nuns were squabbling with each other. One was accusing the other of giving my mum of not sterilising the needle because the infection, blew up right where at the point where the needle was given, and she had abscesses, on her breast, and we believe that the infection was probably passed on to the baby
by an unsterilised needle.
Yes, in those days they weren't disposable. You had to sterilise them, and then. When the baby got sick, she overheard the nuns were fighting with each other, accusing the other of not sterilising their needle. And then William would have been taken away from her. He was isolated. I mean, the girls it was probably a sick room, but they nicknamed it a dying room. And she was taken to him maybe a couple of times a day to feed him. She said it was just pathetic. She was watching this little baby die in front of her eyes. He was getting weaker and weaker, and she pleaded with the nuns to please get him some help to have some medical intervention, and she was just ignored until eventually, I think he was 3 weeks old, and he was taken to St. Finbarr's Hospital then. She wasn't allowed to go with him, and he died. Well, she didn't know at the time when he died. It took her over 30 years to go back to Besborough and find out, but he actually survived another 3 weeks. So he died at 6 weeks of age. So, he was a little fighter, and we really believe if he was given an antibiotic sooner, if there was early medical intervention, that he would have survived. And saved my mother a lot of illnesses because she became very ill herself.
Are we talking about the early 70s here?
No, 1960.
Actually, 1960?
Yeah.
Okay, because what would your mum be now? Early 80s, I suppose?
She's 81 this year.
Okay, that makes sense, yeah. So when William was taken away, she wasn't told that. She was told nothing. It was like as if it was a closed chapter.
She knew that he'd gone to hospital, and she wanted to go with him, but she wasn't allowed. She didn't know anything. They didn't tell her anything until the day a nun came to her and just said, very matter-of-factly, your baby has died and he's already buried. And we found out both those things were lies years later.
And she's a young girl herself. She then is discharged from Bessborough and does what?
Well, they sent her back to where she came from, which was in London, with the Crusader Rescue. They put her into, digs for a couple of nights, I think, and then she very quickly got work herself. But she was extremely sick. I mean, at the place where this abscess was, which she said was like the size of a grapefruit, that had to be packed out. And since she didn't go to a doctor, she was doing this all herself. She said that open wound never healed for about a year. And then after that, she just couldn't come to terms with the way she was treated in Bessborough and the death of her baby.
Yes.
And she attempted suicide 3 times in all. And I think she had a spell in a psychiatric hospital in Surrey for about 6 months. And she says they saved her life. But even in the psychiatric hospital, she couldn't tell them why she was so traumatised.
And she clearly, obviously, lived with that for many years in private. Didn't share it with anybody that came into her life. Those
not
that she met,
soul.
not a soul.
Until
not she was
not her mother, not her own. Her grandmother who brought her up. She couldn't do that to. She said, "I couldn't do that to my lovely mum who already brought me up."
But she did confide in you, though, didn't she, at some stage?
But only because I was brought up in London, and it just coincidentally, I ended up marrying a Cork man. And when we had 2 young children, we moved to Cork, and coincidentally, I'm only a 10-minute drive from Bessborough. My life evolves around Bessborough. The kids went to school nearby and everything. So she came over to visit us just soon after we had moved here, and she disappeared for the day. And when she came back, she was just distraught. She'd been down to Bessborough. She'd got the courage to knock on the door, and it just took her a long while to actually be able to verbalise to me what had happened to her.
Right. What was the reception like when she knocked on the door?
Oh, well, the 2 nuns there brought her in because she had already phoned ahead a couple of months before, so they were expecting her, and they had made an inquiry to St Finbarr's on her behalf via the chaplaincy, and they had got a letter back, but we now know that they chose not to give that letter to my mother. Instead, they took her down to the graveyard in Bessborough, and one of the nuns just patted a piece of ground in the graveyard and said, "Your baby's buried here."
So would you, you're au fait with Bessborough and the layout of the land. When you say patted the ground, was it in the nuns' graveyard area behind the railings?
Yes, yes.
But that wasn't...
I've been going there for 30 years now.
Yeah. Because you thought your brother was there, William.
Well, we did until you start speaking to other people, and then, I had no idea of how many other children had died at the time.
There wouldn't be room enough for them.
Well, exactly. Once I realised the numbers, but, in my mum's mind, she had a kind of a sense of peace that she knew where her baby was. She'd actually asked the nuns if she could have put a plaque there, but they refused. They said, no, you can't put a plaque there. But when the Tume baby story, the Tume home story broke, we actually just put a plaque down there anyway. But then the big breakthrough came in when the Commission's 5th interim report came out. And I was notified by, actually it was Kaylin Hogan who wrote the book, The Republic of Shame. She texted me to say that I think your mother's story is on page 36. I was only just starting reading the report, never got to that far. And I just couldn't believe that this is how we found out where William was buried.
Yeah. It's hard to put a number on it, but it's certainly above 900 babies died.
Well, there's the 923 are registered. Yeah.
Of which hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds are unknown as to their place of rest.
Yeah, there's only records for 64. But even that, if you count, William is meant to be one of the 64. The letter says that he was buried in Carr's Hill, and also that he remained in the hospital for 11 days before he was buried.
You were one of the lucky ones to even find out that information.
That was the information that was really meant for my letter, that the letter was dated, in December 1964 when my mum went down to Bessborough. But the nuns for whatever reason, maybe they thought it was a kindness not to tell her that the baby was buried in Cars Hill. I don't know. But it has taken us all these years, and she's never stopped fighting. For instance, even now we would like more information because the records for William in Besborough are missing. There's records for other babies, but there's nothing for William. And they would have documented his illness. They would have documented how much he was feeding and how much he weighed.
Yeah.
I've seen those records of babies who were there at the exact same time.
She tormented by it all?
Absolutely tormented. And, we're tormented by the fact that, that there could be prospects of developments happening on the grounds of Besborough where there could be hundreds of children buried. And we're I'm involved with a campaign with a young man called Daniel Loftus who also has a connection to Besborough to save Besborough, to stop any future developments happening. And, we've also set up an email campaign called The Legacy of Besborough, because we don't think there was enough done when the Commission investigated Besborough to see whether there.
Listen, I've read the report. It's a whitewash. It's very, very weak. It really and truly is. It's appallingly weak. It's far from justice. Did your mother visit? Does she visit? Does she visit Cars Hill Cemetery, or is she in the UK, or where is she?
Actually, she lives in the UK. She lives in London. Actually, on my Twitter account, the back picture is my mother going up to Cars Hill for the first time. I describe her as being a very lonely figure looking on this 5-acre plot looking for any signs of a grave.
There is none.
And there is none. There's, meant to be 30,000 Cork people buried there, and there is not one.
Isn't it in a shocking state?
It is. It gets kind of a little bit tied up once a year. There is a famine commemoration there once a year, and the grass at the front will get mowed a little bit, but it is really overrun with bracken and brambles.
It's dreadful. It really is. So, but we know of the famine aspect of it, or the genocide that we call famine. But the other aspect of it is there could be many little babies from mother and baby homes buried there as well. There is no documentary evidence to say that, but I think the Commission said that it is more than likely that babies that died in St Finbarr's especially would have been buried up there. But there is no records at all to confirm this, and this is really distressing. But would they have had a service and a ceremony and a Christian burial?
I have no idea. I mean, there's much speculation. Why was William in the morgue for 11 days? Were they waiting for someone else to die to put him into the coffin and to bury them together? Because that seemed to be a practice as well.
There is, of course, the other aspect to it, which is you talk about in your Twitter, you were saying the incompetence and neglect that led to his death, that life could have been saved.
Yes.
But an 18-year-old girl at the time, of course, can't shout very loud.
No, and she did her best, but she was absolutely demonised by the sister there that just wasn't going to take any advice from a young girl. She was going to do it her way. And, we know that there were vaccination trials going on there at the same time. Yeah. And I've seen records where, there was updates to people who had a vaccination, a 3-in-1, and a doctor was there making notes on the day that William was born. So it seems if you were private, you got your medical care, and if you came from the Magdalen Laundries or the industrial schools, the nuns would look after you. But if you were a poor country girl that was born out of wedlock herself, you got nothing. She had no antenatal care at all.
You were worked hard as well on top of everything else. If you were there for a period of time.
Absolutely.
But
and then, like at her young age, then they would have put her on night duty as well, so that she would be waiting there if a girl went into labour. I mean, a young girl that's never had any midwifery experience.
Oh, it's a very frightening place. Yeah, very scary place. But as an 80-year-old woman now, your mum, what would she like to see done now?
Well, I'm hoping that we can get an inquest into his death. This would be her redress. She's not interested in money. She's interested in getting justice for William. She really believes that he was neglected. She knows he was. She was the witness, and she wants that acknowledged. And and that this is our only route now left, because the Commission didn't cut it. So, and her pleas to the government and everything have fallen on deaf ears. They're just not listening. They're not
you have
listening.
a big hill to climb there, a big mountain to climb, I would think.
Absolutely. But we will go. If anything else, history will show by the paper trail of the fight that we have led to get justice for William. History will prove that we were right in doing this and pursuing it.
Okay. Do stay in touch, but thank you for sharing the story of your brother William and your mum and your good self. Like so many other stories, each and every one of them tragic to those involved. Thank you so much, Carmel. Appreciate you taking the call.
Thank you, Neil.
Take care. Bye for now. Text 0868 104 106.
Get it off your chest.